Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar.
Adonai.
Assalamu alaikum to our Muslim brothers and sisters. Shalom to our Hebrew cousins, and welcome to our Christian friends. We're happy today that you're joining us on Descendants of Abraham. And in today's program, we are going to draw closer to Father Abraham as he faces the test, the ultimate test of all tests of his faith in the Creator God. Now, today I'm going to have Brother Manukian, Stephen Manukian, join me as we discuss this very, very important lesson that is not only for Father Abraham, but is for us today. Abraham, at this point, he was 120 years old. Even in his generation, this was old. And he was looking forward to his retirement. He was wealthy. He had honor among friends and neighbors where he lived. He was living in Beersheba at this time. And his life was filled with the blessings of God. I mean, you know, at this point, he needed nothing else. And he was at the best time of his life, wasn't he?
That's true. He thought probably, you know, the life trials were pretty much over, and he settled down in Beersheba, and he was doing well. And then the ultimate test came, and he was facing a much larger test than probably he would have ever faced before. Actually, I believe it's one of the greatest acts of obedience in recorded history.
Let's take a look at that verse, that scripture verse. Okay, it's in Genesis 22, verse 1 and 2. And we'll take a look at that now. Now it came to pass after these things that God tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham. And he said, Here I am. And God said, Now take your son, your only son, Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I shall tell you. Brother Manukian, you have children.
I do.
What if God came to you today with that command? How would you feel?
I don't know what my response would be, but I would probably be doubtful and angry. I cannot imagine taking my little daughter and sacrificing her. It's just too much to bear as a parent. It's extremely hard. And that's what happened here. The Lord coming to Abraham and asking him to sacrifice his only loved child. I cannot imagine that. It's beyond me, actually.
It is, isn't it, for us? But, you know, do you think Abraham would have questioned, is this from God or is this from Satan? You know, what this request, do you think he at any time questioned this command?
Probably he would have questioned it. See, we've got to understand that God is the author of life, and God is love. And so whatever God proposes, everything that he does is to give life to human beings. And of course, Satan is the author of death. And here he is, the Lord coming to him and saying, take your son and sacrifice your son, which was the opposite of God's character. So yes, I believe that probably he was in a lot of doubt, and he probably wasn't sure of what was happening there. We've also got to understand that during those times, the heathens sacrificed people. They had human sacrifices. And here the Lord, who is the author of life, and detested that human sacrifices that these heathen nations did, it was asking Abraham to do the same thing. And so I believe that probably Abraham was struggling with what the Lord had requested from him.
Right, because when he was living in Ur, God called him out of that, right? Out of all of the paganism that was going on, which child sacrifice was part of that, and the idolatry, and called Abraham. And at that time, he obeyed, and he came out and left Ur to go into this foreign land and left everyone behind. And now it seemed like he was saying, well, take part of that religion.
Yeah, exactly.
And that couldn't have been easy for him. What do you think, or how do you think he felt? Do you think sometimes we read about this and we think that God gave him the command and he said, okay, and he took Isaac and he went and tried to obey and slay his son. And that's it. But there had to have been a lot of pain there, didn't there?
Definitely. When we read the scripture, what happens is we see the stories flowing, and the emotional element probably isn't revealed as it should be. And so I believe there was a lot of emotions involved in this whole process. Mm-hmm. And it's not as simple as we think it is.
Isaac was supposed to be the promised son, right? The son of the blessing.
Yes.
Why would God then ask Abraham to kill him? Why do you think he would ask him that? What would Abraham be thinking at that time?
I think what the Lord was trying to do is test Abraham to the limit. That his priority was God. And God came first in his life, and of course there was his son Isaac as well. So it was a test between Isaac and God. And we know what happened as a result of the story. It's clear in the Bible what Abraham had to choose, or what he chose.
Right, and I mean, when God tested him by asking him to come out, leave his relatives, leave his land, leave everything behind him, and come to this foreign land. And that land happened to be where the Canaanites dwelt, right? It was to Canaan. And so he obeyed God without questioning all this time.
Yes.
Why this test? I mean, why this one? Wasn't he obedient all along?
He was obedient. If you look at the story, the Lord came to him and asked him to leave Haran. He left Haran. He went to Canaan, and he was dwelling in Beersheba. At the same time, he had been obedient to the Lord throughout this whole time. But this was like the ultimate test, in my opinion. It was an ultimate test. The only son through whom his descendants had been promised was to be sacrificed. It was the greatest test, and the test of obedience.
And do you think, because sometimes I wonder, did this test come to him because of what Ham and Hagar did regarding trying to get involved in the son of promise, and Ishmael, was the result of that, and so in a way he failed there, didn't he?
He did. We know from the story, he had mistrusted God at a certain point, and had, of course, gone with Hagar, and then Ishmael was born as a result of that. And there was a bit of a mistrust. But it seems that the Lord came back to Abraham to try him again. And this time he did not fail.
This time he did not fail, and this time it is the ultimate test, isn't it? When we read about this part of Abraham's life, and we look into the book of Genesis, the book of the beginnings, and read about what happened here, it doesn't tell us anywhere when we read the story that Abraham talked to Sarah, his wife, about Isaac, about the sacrifice of Isaac, does it?
The Bible does not mention Abraham talking to Sarah. I believe the mother instinct would have come in there, and she would have resisted Abraham going or leaving. I'm sure there would have been a battle between Sarah and Abraham. After so many years of waiting, here was the promised son, and all he was going to do now is take him and sacrifice him. So I think Abraham was trying to avoid that. So he did not even share it with Sarah.
I think so. I think so, because it doesn't mention anything about Sarah and Sarah's involvement in this, and probably she would have gotten in the way of that. Let's, I think at that time, do you think Abraham had to hold on to something? He had to have, you talk about he had the relationship, he knew God's voice, right? He had that relationship with the Creator God. In the beginning. We've got to understand something here. As I mentioned a bit earlier on, Abraham on one side knew that God was the God of love and the author of life. And here he was being tested by God to go and sacrifice his son. I believe that it was his strong relationship with the Lord, with God, that strengthened his faith to go and to go on that journey. And I believe that it was his experience previously with the Lord coming to him and telling him to leave Haran and going to the promised land that he had been promised. He had heard the voice of God, he knew it was the Lord, and he was sure of it. Okay. And so that is why he went, I believe, with the journey that he was going to go on. Yeah, let's take a look at another scripture here from the Genesis. Here, Genesis chapter 15, verse 5, in the scriptures here. And it says, "Then he brought him outside and said, 'Look now toward heaven, and count the stars if you are able to number them.' And he said to him, 'So shall your descendants be.'" Do you think Abraham had to remember that promise? That promise was made to him 50 years before this time of God asking him to sacrifice Isaac, right? True. Approximately that. Do you think that he had to hold on to that promise? Because again, just like you said in the beginning, I wouldn't do it. I would not take a knife and put it in my daughter or my son. I know I couldn't do that, and at least not today. But then again, we have hindsight. We have so many stories that the patriarchs left for us to show us who God is. But at the same time, at that time, Abraham didn't have the Torah. He didn't have any scriptures. He didn't have anything except his relationship with the Creator God. There's one point here we've also got to remember, is that every time that the Lord promised something to Abraham, he delivered it. The Lord came to Abraham and Sarah and said, of course you're going to have a child, and out of your child there's going to be a descendant. Now they weren't young when the Lord made that promise. True. And here, lo and behold, at a very ripe age, Sarah bears a child, a son, and Abraham is really ripe in age as well. And there, the Lord delivered his promise. That's right. And that, I think, gave him the power and the boost to trust in the Lord and put his faith fully in the Lord. True. At the same time, what God was asking him to do now wasn't really, he wasn't saying that, if you do this, I will do. He just says, take your son, your only son, and go and sacrifice him and take his life. Offer him as a burnt offering. There was no promise as such there at that time, was there? No. He took it by faith, I believe. He took it by faith. That's where the obedience comes in, right? Exactly. The obedience. I think Abraham probably was thinking, I'm going to take my son, and I'm going to sacrifice him just as the Lord had asked me. But if I sacrifice my son, the Lord had the power to resurrect him from the dead. And so probably I believe he was going with that faith.
that even if he had sacrificed his son, he was going to be resurrected. And the Lord could have done that. And that is why he went ahead with his journey.
So you think that he believed that the Lord would have raised Isaac back from the dead and given him back to...
I do believe that he believed in that. But it wasn't easy. A lot of times we think that is easy. But he should have really, really struggled in the meantime. We've got to also keep in mind that there was a 3-day journey from Beersheba all the way to Mount Moriah.
Right.
During that 3 days, I am sure Abraham was negotiating and struggling with the Lord, just as he was trying to negotiate with the Lord with regards to Lot and
Right.
Sodom and Gomorrah.
Yeah, I believe that. And, you know, we talk about the 3-day journey. But what about that night? I'm sure he prayed. He prayed to the Creator God, begging him for maybe confirmation, maybe clarity, you know. And then he had to go to his son and tell his son, pack your things, we're leaving. And yet, he doesn't tell him why yet. We just have to go and make an offering. We have to go, you know,
Yes.
and Isaac is used to going and making offerings and sacrifices with his father. But Abraham had to hold that in his heart
Yes.
when he's saying to his son, let's go to Moriah. He had to go and get him. What do you think must have been going on in his soul at that time as a father? And you can't tell your child what it is.
I personally would be torn apart. I would probably want to run away from home and not heed to the Lord, voice of the Lord. It must have been a very tough situation for him.
And yet sometimes we tend to think that it must have been easy. He had a relationship and he can just take the son and be obedient and move on. But that's not the case.
True.
You know?
When you read the Bible, it's presenting facts, and so the emotions don't often come through. But I believe there was a lot of emotions going on there.
There had to be.
Yeah.
I think so. There had to be. You talked about the 3-day journey to Moriah. You know, we read that God said to Abraham, you know, take your son, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering, of which I shall tell you. At that time, God didn't tell him where, right? Just
True.
to the land.
Even the journey from Beersheba all the way to Jerusalem, or Mount Moriah, I should say, was an act of faith. Because the Lord was going to reveal to him where he was going to sacrifice his son.
That's right. Just like when he left Ur, right?
Exactly.
You're going to
Yeah.
go, but we don't know where. So, you know, you're saying that he had the relationship with God. He knew his voice. He was sure. And even so, when he got to Moriah, God must have given him some sign, that's the mountain, that's where you go.
True.
Do you think that even that confirmation, even the confirmation that, yes, this is God, would have taken away the pain?
I really doubt that. The mere fact taking a knife into your hand and sacrificing your child is not an easy task.
It's not an easy thing. And that pain, and I think that's what sometimes we need to realize, that when God asks us to do something, it's not always pleasant, but we have to be obedient to anyway, and we have to listen. Let's take a look at Genesis 22, 7 and 8, verses 22, 7 and 8. And it says, but Isaac spoke to Abraham his father and said, my father. And he said, here I am, my son. And Isaac said, look, the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering? And Abraham said, my son, God will provide for himself the lamb for a burnt offering. And the two of them went together. What do you think about that? Here's Isaac looking around and saying, Father, Abba, Daddy, here's the wood, here's the fire, where's the offering?
He wasn't sure as well what was happening there. And he was beginning to ask, Dad, where's the lamb or the ram that you want me to sacrifice? It wasn't there. So he wasn't sure what was going on as well.
Right, Isaac wasn't sure, but Abraham knew.
Abraham knew, and he hadn't told Isaac
He
that.
hadn't told Isaac, but here it is, your son now comes and says, Daddy, Abba, where is the offering? Where is the lamb? What are you feeling? You can't say anything yet.
It must have been very hard. I mean, the mere fact that he had not mentioned it to Isaac, I believe he was struggling with it.
Right.
He was struggling with him going and sacrificing his son.
And then we read that Abraham bound him and built the altar and laid him on the wood.
Yes.
How old was Isaac about that time?
About, I believe 20 years old.
20 years old, a very strong young man. Abraham is an old 120-year-old man.
That's true.
Why didn't Isaac take off?
Well, if you look at it, there Abraham builds the altar. You have this young man who's alone with this older man. All he had to do is just run and take off. That's all he had to do, because the servants left them at a certain spot. They moved forward, and they came to the place of sacrifice. He was bound, and all Isaac had to do was just run away. But he doesn't do that. I believe that he also had faith that the Lord was going to provide.
That Isaac had that faith.
Exactly.
And, you know, I think that's true, because we read the story and we say Abraham was the father of faith. Well, his son Isaac also had to have that faith. He could have overpowered his father, he could have done anything, but he must have believed in the God of Abraham.
Exactly.
Also, and submitted.
Exactly.
Submitted to his father, as his father submits to the Creator God.
Exactly. Here I believe we see the faith of Abraham as well as Isaac. A lot of times we don't look at Isaac's faith here, but Isaac had very strong faith, I believe, because he could have run away.
That's right. That's right. Let's take a look at a couple more verses here in Genesis 22:11 through 13. And that says, But the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven and said, Abraham, Abraham. And he said, Here I am. And he said, Do not lay your hand on the lad or do anything to him, for now I know that you fear God, seeing you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. Then Abraham lifted his eyes and looked, and there behind him was a ram caught in a thicket by its horns. So Abraham went and took the ram and offered it up for a burnt offering instead of his son. And Abraham called the name of the place, The Lord Will Provide. There's a lot being said in there, isn't there?
True. There's a lot in that little passage.
So Abraham's got the knife, and he's about to slay his son Isaac, and right the last second, the Creator waited before he said no.
Yes. That's exactly what happened. I mean, it was a last-minute thing. The Lord spoke to him. The Lord had to speak to him and then he looked back, and there was the ram that was provided for sacrifice. And it was the ultimate test to the last second.
To the last second. And both Abraham and Isaac passed that test.
True.
They both passed that test.
They both did.
And they must have been so relieved and thankful to God.
That's true.
For providing, and He did provide. In verse 18 of that same chapter, Genesis 22, verse 18, that promise was repeated after Abraham and Isaac were faithful. It says, In your seed all the nations of the earth shall be blessed, because you have obeyed my voice. All the nations. of the earth shall be blessed because you have obeyed my voice. So again, God repeated that promise.
True.
Do you think that all of heaven were witnessing this awesome scene? They had to have been witnessing this awesome scene, not only testing the faith of Abraham, but the submission of the Son.
That's true. Heaven must have been watching and looking at this man who was just going to go sacrifice his son 100% depending on the Lord. And I believe heaven was pleased by his obedience, by his faith in God.
Today we touched on Father Abraham and the sacrifice of his son that the Creator God asked him to do. Does that mean that our Creator God believes in human sacrifice and the sacrifice of children in taking their lives? I would like to say absolutely not. No, he does not. This was a test of faith of Father Abraham, but I believe that God would never have allowed him to take Isaac's life. And, you know, he didn't have to find out, we didn't have to find out, because God stepped in at that right moment and says, stop. That is proof enough that he never would have done it. He just wanted to see and test Abraham's faith. That was so important. If you would like more information on the God of Abraham, the Creator God, or you have any questions about this program or any other program that we have done, please write to us. Go to the website www.descendantsofabraham.org. All correspondence is kept confidential. We will never give your name or your contact information. Please contact us. Tell us if you're enjoying the program. If you have any questions, we have material we can send to you. We will answer all questions as best as we can. And if we don't have the answer, we'll find out and get it to you. Please contact us. God bless you.
When you give to the descendants of Abraham, you can be sure that you are lighting the way for all in search of the Creator God and His message of love and forgiveness to all nations. Thank you for your support and for your prayers. All contributions are tax deductible. Please visit us online today at www.descendantsofabraham.org or write to us at the address you see listed on your screen. All correspondence will be kept confidential.